In a small town where everyone knew each other's business, one quiet man stand against a group of intimidating bikers would change everything. This is a story of courage, respect, and the unexpected power of silence. What happens when a man who never sought attention becomes the hero his town never knew it needed? When a single act of standing firm sends shockwaves through a community, inspiring change in ways no one could have predicted. You won't believe how John Harper's calm, unyielding strength not only shaped his daughter's future, but transformed the very essence of Ashford. This isn't just a story of standing up to bullies. It's a powerful reminder that true strength doesn't come from violence, but from knowing when to act with purpose. Stay with us till the end. You'll want to hear how this quiet revolution unfolded. Before we dive deeper into this gripping story, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, Epic Story Moments, yet, now is the perfect time. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update, and be the first to hear our incredible news stories. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support more heartwarming tales like this. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. The laughter that had seemed so distant at first now felt like a looming storm. Claire Harper had no idea how quickly her quiet summer evening was about to unravel. She stood at the small, rundown gas station on the edge of Oak Ridge, her hands wrapped around a heavy feed bag as the sun dipped lower into the horizon, casting a deep orange glow over the landscape. The warmth of the day clung to the air, thick and humid, as she worked alongside her father, John Harper, unloading supplies for their family farm. 18 years old and full of ambition, Claire was no stranger to hard work. Her bright eyes and determined smile had seen her through countless long days on the land her family had tended for generations. Her father, a stoic and steady presence, worked beside her without complaint, his broad shoulders and weathered hands speaking of decades of labor and sacrifice. Yet, despite the calm routine of their task, Claire couldn't shake a strange sense of unease. The faint rumble of engines grew louder in the distance. Claire paused, glancing down the road that stretched out toward the horizon. The sound was unnatural, aggressive, sharp, and foreign to the quiet town of Oak Ridge, where everyone knew everyone and disturbances were rare. Within moments, the source of the noise came into view, a gang of motorcycles tearing down the road like a pack of wolves. Dust kicked up behind them, and the low growls of their engines seemed to vibrate the very ground. Claire's heart sank as she recognized the name painted on the back of their leather jackets. The Iron Wolves. She had heard stories about them, whispered warnings from townspeople and headlines in the local papers. The gang was infamous for their reckless behavior, their intimidation tactics, and the trail of fear they left behind in every town they visited. But they had never ventured this far into Oak Ridge before. The motorcycles roared into the gas station, their riders dismounting with an air of defiance and arrogance. At the center of the group was their leader, Jake Fury Daniels. He was tall, with tattoos creeping up his neck and dark sunglasses that hid his eyes but not the malice behind them. His leather jacket was adorned with patches that boasted his dominance, and his smirk spoke volumes about his intent. Claire kept her head down, hoping they wouldn't notice her. She focused on the feed bags, her hands trembling slightly as she continued working. But her hope was short-lived. Fury's gaze landed on her, and his smirk widened into a predatory grin. "Well, well," he called out, his voice loud and mocking. "What do we have here? A little country girl working hard in this dump. Bet you've never seen a real man before." The laughter of his gang echoed across the gas station, sharp and cruel. Claire felt her face flush, but she didn't look up, refusing to acknowledge them. Fury wasn't deterred. He took a few steps closer, his boots crunching against the gravel. "What's a pretty thing like you doing in a place like this? Looking for a ride? Or maybe," he paused, letting his words hang in the air, "you're hoping a real man can teach you how it's done?" The gang roared with laughter again, their voices bouncing off the walls of the gas station. Claire's stomach churned. She gripped the feed bag tighter, her knuckles whitening. Her father, standing a few feet away at the gas pump, remained calm, his back to the gang. Claire knew he wouldn't act unless he had to, but she could feel his tension. Another biker, a hulking man with a patch over one eye, brushed past her, his arm grazing hers. He leaned in, his voice a low, leering whisper. "You bored, sweetheart? I've got a few ways to make your day more interesting." Claire's hands shook, but she refused to flinch. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. From the corner of her eye, she saw another biker, a wiry man with a patch-reading Viper, grab a greasy rag from the counter and toss it at her. "Here, little girl," he sneered. "Go clean something. That's what country girls are good for, right?" The gang's laughter grew louder, more vicious. Fury raised a hand, silencing them as he took another step toward Claire. His voice dropped, low and menacing. "You need someone to show you what it's like to be treated by a real man," he growled, his face inches from hers. Claire's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to back away. She stood her ground, even as fear and anger warred within her. Then a deep, steady voice cut through the tension. "Leave her alone." The bikers turned toward the source of the voice. John Harper had finally moved, his calm demeanor masking the storm brewing beneath. He stepped forward, his broad shoulders squared, his eyes dark with restrained fury. Fury laughed, the sound hollow and forced. "Who are you? Grandpa coming to the rescue?" John didn't respond immediately. He walked to Claire's side, placing himself between her and Fury. His voice, low and deliberate, carried an authority that silenced the bikers. "Walk away," he said. Fury smirked, trying to mask his unease. "Or what? You think you can take us?" John's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "I don't think. I know." For a moment, there was silence. The bikers hesitated, their bravado cracking under the weight of John's unwavering confidence. Fury's smirk faltered, but he wasn't ready to back down. He took a step forward, challenging the older man. But before he could act, John moved. With a speed and precision honed by years of training, he disarmed Fury with a single calculated strike, sending the gang leader stumbling backward. The bikers froze, stunned by the swiftness of the action. "Anyone else?" John asked, his voice calm but deadly. The gang exchanged uneasy glances, their arrogance evaporating. Fury scrambled to his feet, glaring at John, but he didn't make another move. "This isn't over," Fury spat before retreating toward his bike. One by one, the gang followed, their motorcycles roaring to life as they sped away into the night. As the dust settled, Claire turned to her father, her chest still heaving with adrenaline. "Dad," she began, her voice shaking. John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Claire. Let's go home." As they drove back to the farm, the orange glow of the setting sun faded into darkness. But for Claire, the light of her father's quiet strength and unwavering courage would never dim. He wasn't just her protector. He was her hero. Ground, his gaze unwavering as he addressed Jake. "The girl has a name, and she's not looking for company," he said, his tone firm but calm. He took another step closer, positioning himself between Claire and the gang, his presence a silent yet undeniable barrier. Jake tilted his head slightly, his smirk deepening. "Relax, old man. We're just passing through, enjoying the scenery." His words were casual, but the undertone of menace was clear. John's jaw tightened. "If that's the case, you've enjoyed enough. Time to move on." The bikers exchanged glances, a mixture of amusement and irritation crossing their faces. Randy, the one who had reached for Claire, took a step forward, but Jake raised a hand, stopping him. "Easy, Randy. The man's just looking out for his kid." Claire, still standing behind her father, felt a mix of relief and tension. She could see the storm brewing, the subtle shift in the gang's demeanor. They weren't used to being challenged, and John's calm defiance was starting to irritate them. "Tell you what," Jake said, his voice dropping an octave, "we'll be on our way. But Maybe your girl here could be a little friendlier next time. No harm in saying hello, right? He shot a pointed look at Claire, his smirk returning. John didn't move, his eyes locked on Jake's. "You're leaving now," he said evenly, "and you won't come back." The silence that followed was heavy, the air crackling with unspoken threats. For a moment, it seemed like Jake might push back, his ego unwilling to let an older man dictate terms. But then he laughed, a low, humorless sound that carried no warmth. "All right, old man, we're leaving. For now." He gestured to his gang, and one by one, they climbed back onto their bikes. The roar of their engines filled the air as they revved up, their exit as loud and disruptive as their arrival. Jake was the last to mount his bike, his eyes lingering on John and Claire for a moment before he pulled his sunglasses back into place. "See you around," he said, his tone laced with a warning. As the gang roared out of the gas station and down the road, the tension slowly began to dissipate. But Claire knew, just as her father did, that this wasn't the end of it. The bikers weren't the kind to let something like this slide. John turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "You all right?" he asked. Claire nodded, though her heart was still racing. "Yeah, thanks, Dad." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Let's get home," he said. "We've got work to do." As they drove back to the farm, Claire couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that lingered. The bikers' presence had been a disruption, a crack in the fragile peace of their small town. And though her father had managed to hold them off for now, she couldn't help but wonder how long it would be before they returned, and what would happen when they did. Father remained unshaken. John's expression didn't waver as the bikers laughed around him. His eyes, sharp and steady, stayed locked on Jake, refusing to give the gang leader the satisfaction of a reaction. The years of military discipline had taught him how to remain calm under fire, and he wasn't about to let a group of thugs rattle him. "Enough," John said, his voice calm but firm, slicing through the cruel laughter. The word hung in the air, commanding attention. He took a step forward, his presence overpowering despite being outnumbered. "You've had your fun. Now, I'm asking you one last time. Walk away." The sudden shift in John's tone silenced the bikers for a moment. The confidence in his voice wasn't arrogance. It was the quiet assurance of a man who had been through far worse than this. Jake hesitated, his grin faltering just slightly. For the first time, he seemed to sense that John wasn't someone to be taken lightly. But his ego wouldn't let him back down, not in front of his gang. Jake sneered, leaning in closer. "You don't get to tell me what to do, old man. You're not in the Marines anymore. This is my turf now." John held his ground, his gaze unwavering. He could feel Claire behind him, her presence giving him strength. He wasn't just standing up to these men for himself. He was standing up for her, for the principles he had lived his life by, and for the belief that no one had the right to intimidate or belittle his family. "Your turf," John said, his voice steady and even. "This isn't about territory, Jake. This is about respect. Something you clearly don't understand." The gang stirred uneasily, exchanging glances. John's words carried a weight they couldn't ignore. Jake, however, wasn't ready to back down. He laughed, a hollow sound meant to mask his own unease. "Respect? You think you can teach me about respect? You're just an old man trying to relive his glory days." John's lips pressed into a thin line. He took a deliberate step closer, now standing toe-to-toe with Jake. His voice dropped, quiet but charged with authority. "I've seen men like you before. Bullies. Always trying to prove something. But let me tell you something, Jake. You don't scare me. And you're not going to win." Jake's smirk faltered, and for a moment, the bravado cracked. But before he could respond, Claire's voice rang out, clear and strong. "Enough," she said, stepping out from behind her father. Her hands were clenched into fists, her heart pounding, but her voice didn't waver. "This stops now." The bikers turned to her in surprise, their mocking expressions replaced with a flicker of respect for her courage. Jake glared at her, his bravado returning as he saw an opportunity to regain control. "Look at this," he said, laughing. "The little girl thinks she can play hero." Claire didn't back down. She squared her shoulders and met Jake's gaze head-on. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice steady. "And you should be ashamed of yourself. Picking on a girl, trying to scare her, it doesn't make you strong. It makes you pathetic." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jake's grin twisted into a scowl, his fists clenching at his sides. But before he could act, John stepped between them, his voice like steel. "You heard her," John said. "It's over. Leave." The silence was deafening as the gang waited for Jake's response. His pride was wounded, but the look in John's eyes warned him that pushing further would be a mistake. For the first time, Jake seemed to realize that he might not come out on top. With a sharp nod, Jake stepped back, signaling to his gang. "Let's go," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "This isn't worth it." The bikers hesitated, but ultimately followed their leader, their boots crunching on the gravel as they retreated. Jake shot one last glare at John and Claire before climbing onto his bike. "This isn't over," he muttered, revving the engine. John watched them go, his posture finally relaxing as the roar of motorcycles faded into the distance. Claire let out a shaky breath, her hands still trembling. She turned to her father, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did good, kid," he said. "You stood your ground. I'm proud of you." Claire smiled, her fear melting away as a wave of relief washed over her. Together, they turned back toward the gas station, leaving the confrontation behind. The bond between them had only grown stronger, forged in the heat of a moment that would stay with them forever. To the ground, the biker crumpled, groaning in pain as John stepped back, his eyes sweeping the remaining gang members. He stood tall, calm, and unshaken, his mere presence demanding respect. The other bikers froze, paralyzed by the sight of their comrades being systematically dismantled. The bravado and arrogance they carried moments ago evaporated, replaced by fear and uncertainty. John's movements were precise and calculated, the instincts of a soldier who had survived countless battles evident in every motion. Claire, still standing a few steps away, could hardly breathe. The gasoline clinging to her clothes felt cold against her skin, but the warmth of safety radiating from her father anchored her. She had never seen this side of him before, a protector capable of stopping anyone who dared to harm her. Jake groaned as he struggled to his feet, his face red with fury and humiliation. "You think you've won, old man," he spat, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "This isn't over." John's piercing gaze landed on Jake like a hammer. "It is over," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. He took a step closer, and Jake instinctively backed away. "Take your gang and leave before you make another mistake you can't undo." The tension in the air was suffocating. Jake glanced around at his gang, who now looked to him for direction. Their expressions betrayed their fear, their earlier confidence shattered. Slowly, reluctantly, Jake nodded. "Let's go," he muttered, his voice lacking the bravado it had carried before. He turned and began walking toward his bike, the rest of the gang following hesitantly. One by one, the motorcycles roared to life, and within moments, the gang was gone, leaving only the fading echoes of their engines behind. The gas station fell silent. Claire finally exhaled, her heart still pounding in her chest. She looked at her father, who stood motionless, watching the bikers retreat. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and for the first time since the confrontation began, the fierce intensity in his eyes softened. "Are you okay, Claire?" he asked, his voice calm and steady, as if the chaos of the last few minutes hadn't just happened. She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "Dad, what was that?" she finally managed to ask, her words trembling. John sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "That was just me making sure they knew not to mess with us," he said simply, though his tone carried a weight she couldn't ignore. "But you moved like you've done this before," she said, searching his face for answers. He hesitated, his eyes meeting hers. "There's a lot about my past I haven't shared with you," he admitted, "but none of it matters more than keeping you safe. That's all you need to know right now." Claire swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always known her father was a man of quiet strength, but today she had seen a side of him that both frightened and reassured her. He wasn't just her dad. He was a protector, a warrior, and someone who would go to any lengths to keep her safe. As the last echoes of the bikers' engines faded into the distance, John reached out and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Let's get you cleaned up," he said gently, his protective tone wrapping around her like a blanket. "We've had enough excitement for one day." Claire nodded, allowing herself to be guided back to the car. Despite the lingering scent of gasoline and the adrenaline still coursing through her veins, she felt a profound sense of safety in her father's presence. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they could face them together. John Harper's quiet life in Ashford had suddenly become the center of attention. What had started as an ordinary day at the gas station had transformed into a story that rippled through the town, touching everyone in unexpected ways. The confrontation with the bikers wasn't just an incident. It was a turning point. People whispered about John with newfound admiration, not only for his bravery, but for the restraint and wisdom he had shown. Tales of his calm demeanor and the way he had handled the situation spread far beyond the gas station. For many, it wasn't just about how he had protected his daughter or stood up to the bikers. It was about the values he had demonstrated. Strength tempered with control, authority wielded with humility, and respect demanded without arrogance. The bikers' humiliation had served as a stark lesson, and Jake's lingering expression of regret was etched into the memories of those who witnessed it. John's parting words to the young biker resonated with many who heard the story. Respect isn't something you take. It's something you earn. Hashtag CLA's growing awareness. For CLA, the days following the event were filled with reflection. She found herself replaying the scene in her mind. Her father's steady steps toward the bikers, the weight of his words, and the way he had carried himself with quiet dignity. She realized that her father had shown her a side of himself she had never known existed. Growing up, John had always been her protector, the steady hand that guided her through life's challenges. But this was different. The man she saw that day wasn't just a father or a farmer. He was a leader, forged by experiences she could barely begin to imagine. And yet, in his strength, there was a profound gentleness that made her feel safer than she ever had before. CLA began to ask questions about his past, piecing together fragments of stories he had only hinted at before. She learned about his time as a Marine captain, the battles he had fought, and the lessons he had carried with him into civilian life. John didn't share everything. Some memories were too heavy to relive, but what he did share deepened her admiration for him. Hashtag the town's transformation. Ashford was a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew each other. The confrontation at the gas station became a catalyst for change, sparking conversations about respect, community, and the importance of standing up for one another. Jake and the bikers didn't return, but their absence wasn't the only sign of change. People began to look out for one another in ways they hadn't before. Neighbors who had barely spoken started checking in on each other. Small acts of kindness became more common, as if John's example had reminded everyone of the values they shared. John, however, remained humble through it all. He didn't seek recognition or accolades. To him, the confrontation was simply a moment where he had done what was necessary to protect his daughter and his values. He continued working on the farm, fixing fences and tending to the crops as if nothing had happened. But for those around him, everything had changed. Hashtag CLA's newfound resolve. Inspired by her father's example, CLA began to approach life with a new sense of purpose. She wanted to embody the strength and wisdom he had shown, to make choices that reflected the lessons she had learned that day. She started small, volunteering at the community center, helping organize events and supporting local initiatives. But her ambitions grew, fueled by the realization that even small actions could make a big difference. CLA began to see herself as part of something larger, a community where she could contribute and inspire others. And through it all, John was there, quietly supporting her, offering guidance when she needed it, but trusting her to find her own path. Hashtag a legacy of strength and wisdom. In the weeks and months that followed, the events at the gas station became something of a legend in Ashford. But for John and CLA, it wasn't about the story. It was about the lessons they had learned and the bond they had strengthened. John had taught his daughter about courage, respect, and the power of restraint. And CLA, in turn, had shown her father that those lessons hadn't been lost on her. As they stood together on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the fields, CLA turned to her father and said, "You know, Dad, you didn't just protect me that day. You showed me what it means to live with integrity. I'll never forget that." John smiled, his eyes filled with quiet pride. "That's all I've ever wanted for you, kiddo. To live your life with purpose and strength. And I know you will." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the farm, they both felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the legacy of that moment would carry on, not just in their family but in the community they called home. The townsfolk of Ashford could feel the ripple effects of John Harper's quiet confrontation for weeks. It wasn't just the drama of standing up to the bikers that captivated them. It was the principles John embodied: strength without aggression, standing firm without shouting, and commanding respect through action rather than force. Conversations in the local diner carried his name in reverent tones, as though recounting a modern-day fable. Women admired his courage not just as a father defending his daughter, but as a man who had redefined strength. Men respected his discipline, noting how he stood his ground without resorting to violence, his mere presence enough to bring the chaos to heel. Even CLA noticed a shift, walking the streets with newfound confidence. No longer merely the farmer's daughter, she had become a reflection of her father's quiet strength, earning warm smiles and genuine greetings from those who had witnessed the transformation. But perhaps the most surprising change came from the bikers themselves. Weeks after that fateful day, Jake, Randy, and the rest of their gang rumbled back into town. This time, their roaring engines were subdued, their bravado noticeably absent. They arrived at the gas station not with taunts or noise, but with a heavy silence, their steps deliberate and cautious. John, ever unassuming, stood outside, observing their approach. His calm demeanor didn't waver, his presence as steady as it had been that day. It wasn't defiance or hostility. It was simply the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. As the bikers drew closer, it was Jake who broke the silence. "John," he started, his voice low, almost hesitant, "we came to apologize. For that day, we were out of line." Randy nodded, his posture slightly hunched as though weighed down by regret. "We were just messing around, but it wasn't right. We were wrong." John stood still, his expression unreadable as he let their words settle. CLA, watching from the doorway, held her breath, waiting for her father's response. She knew he wasn't one to expect apologies, let alone demand them. Finally, John spoke, his voice firm but measured. "Words mean nothing if actions don't follow. I don't need an apology for me. I need to see that you've learned respect. Respect for others, for their lives, and for what's right." Jake and Randy exchanged glances, discomfort flickering across their faces, but they didn't protest. They nodded solemnly, the weight of John's words sinking in. "Thank you," John added, his tone softening, "but don't just apologize to me. Apologize to yourselves. Make sure you don't repeat the same mistakes." With that, the bikers turned and left, their departure as quiet as their arrival. There was no arrogance in their strides, no smirking bravado, just a quiet acknowledgement of the lesson they had learned. CLA approached her father, a swell of pride rising in her chest. "You were right, Dad," she said. her voice filled with admiration. It wasn't just about standing up to them. It was about showing them who they could be if they chose to change. John smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. Respect isn't something you demand, CLA. It's something you earn. And sometimes showing someone respect, even when they don't deserve it, can be the first step in helping them find their own. The days that followed were filled with quiet reflection for the town. John's example lingered in the minds of Ashford's residents, a beacon of strength and humility. At the same time, CLA found herself growing into a woman who carried her father's values with pride. When the time came for CLA to leave for college, it was a bittersweet moment. As John stood beside her car, the morning sunlight casting long shadows across the farm, he felt a mix of pride and longing. "I'm proud of you, kiddo," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. CLA smiled, her eyes glistening. "I'll carry everything you taught me, Dad." It wasn't just about standing up for myself. It was about standing for what's right, no matter what. John chuckled softly, his throat tightening. "You've got the heart for it, CLA. Always have." As the car pulled away, John watched until it disappeared down the road. The fields around him stretched wide and golden, a reminder of the life he had built and the legacy he had passed on. The lesson of that summer, the power of quiet strength, the value of humility, and the courage to inspire change, was one neither John nor CLA would ever forget. In Ashford, a father's resolve and a daughter's courage had become the roots of a deeper understanding, a quiet revolution that would echo far beyond the borders of their small town. This is a powerful and heartfelt conclusion to the story, effectively wrapping up the themes of courage, respect, and the strength to stand for what is right. If you'd like, I can refine this further for fluidity, deeper emotional engagement, or subtle changes to ensure every aspect of the narrative aligns perfectly with your intended tone. Let me know how you'd like to proceed. If John's quiet strength and CLA's journey have inspired you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections in the comments below, and let us know how the themes of courage, respect, and standing up for what's right resonate with you. If you haven't already, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We've got more inspiring stories coming your way, and we want you to be part of the conversation. Stay strong, stay true, and join our community for more powerful stories that challenge, entertain, and uplift. Subscribe now and be the change